Autoimmunity, a presentation by Jennifer Torres. For Cell Biology, Spring 2 semester in 2018, for SUNY Empire State College with Professor Sarah. What is autoimmunity? Autoimmunity is the phenomenon in which a body's innate immune system mistakes the host's own tissues for pathogens and attacks its own cells. The innate immune system, per Harvey Lodish, page 1079, serves as the rapid deployment force to deal with invaders. Key players in autoimmunity include the T cells, the B cells, and immunoglobulin. Who is at risk? Autoimmune response can be hereditary or environmental. Genetics, weight, smoking, and even some medications play a role. The majority affected are women. Per the National Institute of Health, 7 to 8% of the population approximately suffers with autoimmune disease. 75% of those are female. Even though autoimmune disorders vary greatly, a lot of them share common symptoms. The most common symptoms of autoimmune conditions include fatigue or general lethargy even after a full night's rest, joint pain and swelling, including inflammation of not only the joints but the limbs, skin conditions such as dermatitis, urticaria or hives, lesions, psoriasis, and eczema, abdominal pain and digestive issues, including constipation or diarrhea, hypersensitivities to foods and allergens even though you're not allergic, recurring fever, and swollen glands, which include the lymph nodes and salivary glands. A brief review of immunology. What is a T cell? A T cell is a lymphocyte produced in the thymus. Its antigen-specific receptors bind antigenic peptides with major histocompatibility complex, MHC for short, molecules. There are two classes of T cell. Cytotoxic T cells kill virus-infected and tumor cells marked genetically by CD8 surface markers. Helper T cells produce cytokines that activate B cells, marked genetically by CD4 surface markers. A B cell is a lymphocyte produced in the bone marrow. It also expresses antigen-specific receptors, specifically membrane-bound immunoglobulin, or Ig for short. After it interacts with an antigen, the B cell proliferates and differentiates into antibodies screening plasma cells. Immunoglobulin, or Ig for short, is a serum protein produced by B cells that can function as antibodies. They can be membrane-bound as part of a B cell receptor. There are 5 classes, also known as isotypes. These include IgA, D, E, G, and M. The immunoglobulin isotype breakdown. IgA is our first line of defense. It makes up 10 to 15% of serum antibodies. It's made up of 2 monomers which can be joined. It's primarily found in mucosal membranes and body secretions such as mucus and breast milk. IgA binds to antigens or microbes before they reach tissues and expels them as a whole with secretions. This can be in sweat, it could be in sneezing or coughing. It is also how mothers transfer antibodies to babies through breastfeeding. IgD makes up 0.2% of serum antibodies. It is also a monomer, and it's found in blood, lymph, and on the surface of B cells. It works in complement with IgM in B cell development. Researchers don't know much about IgD beyond that, but it is still under review. IgE makes up 20 thousandths of serum antibodies. It's a monomer. It binds to mast cells and basophils. It attracts and complements phagocytic cells. It's involved in allergic reactions and releases histamine to neutralize antigens, such as allergens or even parasitic worms. IgG makes up approximately 80% of serum antibodies. It is also a monomer, and there are 4 subclasses, including IgG1, 2, 3, and 4. IgG is able to leave the bloodstream and move to areas of inflammation in the body. IgG is also one of our first antibodies. IgG3 specifically provides fetus with passive immunity by crossing the placenta. This is the only antibody able to cross the placenta. IgG protects against bacteria, viruses. It neutralizes bacterial toxins, triggers complement protein systems to activate, and binds antigens to each other to enhance the effectiveness of phagocytosis. Long-term immunity, IgG recognizes antigens and persists in neutralizing them for months to years after the initial infection. IgM. IgM makes up 10 to 15% of antibodies. It's a pentamer, which forms a complex of 5 molecules. IgM is the largest of the antibodies. It does not leave the bloodstream, and it binds to red blood cells. IgM is produced rapidly by B cells for quick response time. It aggregates or binds antigens to each other for fast removal during the initial stages of infection. IgM can recognize ABO antigens or blood types. This is what's responsible for an A-type person rejecting B-type blood. The mechanisms of autoimmune response. Formation of neoantigens. Neoantigens are formed due to modifications to self-antigens as a result of chemical binding with reactive molecules, tissue injury, apoptosis, or oxidative stress. Drugs such as penicillin or streptomycin binding to erythrocyte membranes is an example of the creation of these. Superantigens. Superantigens cause nonspecific activation of T cells, resulting in polyclonal T cell activation and excessive cytokine release. Produced by pathogens as a defense mechanism against the immune system, life-threatening symptoms can include shock or organ failure when that occurs. Cross-reactivity and molecular mimicry. Microorganisms express antigens that are similar to self-antigens. The immune system can turn and react to self-peptide as a result of cross-reactivity as well. An example of this includes type 1 diabetes. Idiotype cross-reactions. An idiotype is an antigenic epitope found in the antigen-binding portion of immunoglobulin molecules, or the Fab. A cross-reaction between the idiotype and a host cell receptor or an antiviral antibody can trigger an autoimmune response. Release of sequestered or cryptic antigens. Sequestered antigens are not usually exposed to the immune system, but they become immunogenic when they are. Cryptic antigens are self-isotopes that appear in very low concentration on APCs. They're termed cryptic as they do not delete autoreactive T cells. Dendritic cells, apoptosis, and clearance deficiency. Dendritic cells present antigens to active lymphocytes. If they are defective in apoptosis, they can lead to inappropriate lymphocyte activation. Deficiency in the clearance of apoptotic cells induces autoimmunity. So to recap all of that, we learned that dendritic cells are responsible for capturing antigens. They then present them to the T cells, which identify the antigen and begin forming antibodies. The T cells alert the B cells to release the appropriate immunoglobulin isotype or antibodies to subdue and remove the threat. Once that's complete, phagocytes digest the antigen to stop the infection. Immunoglobulin 4 provides established immunity. It protects the body against that antigen for months or years after the initial infection. But sometimes the body does get confused and attack itself. An autoimmune response would more than likely resemble a path like this. The T cells would recognize the body's own cells as a threat and form antibodies against that, which we would call self-antigens. B cells would release various immunoglobulin antibodies and attack the body's own cells, which would in turn turn into tissue damage. It would also cause inflammatory response and possibly apoptosis of viable cells. And here we just see an example of a normal immunologic response on the left-hand side versus an autoimmune response on the right-hand side. While there's been ample research, we still don't know for certain what causes a person to develop autoimmune reactions. We can hypothesize that hereditary and environmental risk factors play a role. The risk factors include, but are not limited to, hormones, drugs, viruses, pollutants, foods, bacteria, and stress. Here we just have some examples of environmental risk factors in relation to associated autoimmune diseases. For example, hormones as the risk factor. If it were to affect the thyroid and pancreas, looking at the thyroid, we'd have thyroiditis diseases such as Hashimoto's and Graves'. Affecting the pancreas, we'd potentially get type 1 diabetes. Viral and bacterial infections can also be a risk factor. I have various viruses listed here that lead to Lyme disease, multiple sclerosis, and rheumatoid arthritis have been linked to these, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. Chemical pollutants and drugs have been linked to lupus and even autoimmune hepatitis, and certain foods carry with them sensitivities. We know gluten is linked to celiac disease. That's a very common one. But proteins in dairy can also lead to inflammatory responses. I also did notate here that all systems and organs are susceptible to autoimmune attack. There are 3 types of autoimmune disease. They are the hemolytic, which affect strictly blood, localized or organ specific, so again your pancreas, kidneys, etc., and then systemic, which are non-organ specific and affect various tissues throughout the body. And of course, depending on the cytokines released, will have different effects throughout the body as well. And here I have another diagram of just tissues that are affected by autoimmune attack. We see a thyroid, again highlighting Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and Graves' disease. The brain, which is related to multiple sclerosis, autism, Guillain-Barré, GI tract diseases, nerves, lungs, skin, blood, along with some triggers including stress, hormones, metals, food, antigens, pesticides. It can all be interlinked, and no system is safe from autoimmune response. Treatment of autoimmune diseases. Currently, there are no treatments available that'll cure autoimmune disease per se. However, symptoms can be managed. The National Institute of Health also reports that researchers are looking into stem cells as a potential treatment option to reprogram malfunctioning lymphocytic cells via hematopoietic stem cell therapy. The current treatment goals consist of relieving symptoms such as fever, inflammation, and rashes, minimizing organ and tissue damage and the preservation of organ function, and maintaining the body's ability to fight diseases, as the majority of autoimmune patients are often immunocompromised. Examples of some of the therapies currently in use include immunosuppressant drugs such as methotrexate, cyclosporin, cyclophosphamide, and azithromycin. You'll commonly see these prescribed in people with like rheumatologic diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis even. Also see them prescribing a lot of corticosteroids and NSAIDs to help with the inflammation that comes as a result of autoimmune disease. This includes prednisone, methylprednisolone, ibuprofen, naproxen, and even tramadol if you're getting a lot of pain. There has been immunoglobulin replacement therapies such as plasmapheresis and injectables such as Humira, another example for rheumatoid arthritis. Radiation therapy has been used. That's typically for chronically inflamed lymph nodes or issues with the pituitary. It's kind of a last ditch effort once we exhaust oral and injectables, but it's there. Again, people that have autoimmune blood disorders have blood transfusion as an option to them. Surgery is also an option. You can go as far as removing the problem organs such as the thymus or the thyroid. Hormone replacement therapies such as insulin pumps, thyroid replacement hormones, oral thyroid peroxidase to control the antibody levels, even birth control to regulate estrogen and progesterone outputs. Another common treatment option that doctors are starting to suggest today is amending your diet. Research has shown that diet plays a very important part in managing autoimmune response, as certain foods can cause sensitivities and act as inflammation triggers. The foods they're recommending to consider avoiding or limiting include dairy because of the casein and whey proteins, wheats because of the gluten, refined sugars can be very inflammatory, even red meat and nightshade vegetables such as tomato or eggplant. One of the diets for autoimmune people to follow is actually called the Autoimmune Protocol Diet, or AIP. It is another take on the paleo diet that helps you to very slowly eliminate foods which may act as triggers. And it's only recommended short term as a detox. You just usually follow for like a month or two to reset your immune system. If it's working out for you, you can follow it longer, of course, but it's just there to give your body a break. And as a last ditch effort, doctors are also using chemotherapy and biotherapy to essentially reboot or restart the immune system entirely. This is becoming a common treatment in or for multiple sclerosis. And that's all I have for you today. So thank you very much for sitting through my presentation. And here's a little comic for you that I found enjoyable. And if you have any questions, feel free to email me or comment. Thank you again and have a good one.